Hey YouTube, if you've been watching the channel, you know that I recently installed SW Motech engine crash bars on my Triumph Scrambler. Now I had the original OEM Triumph bash plate on my Scrambler, and we found out that it actually would work. So those bars are compatible with the Scrambler, with aero pipes, with a OEM bash plate. I did have a bit of trouble with the bash plate, not so much about would it fit or not, but just it was difficult because of all the moving parts. Rather than modifying the OEM bash plate, I came up with a different solution. And that solution was to pick up a bash plate from R&G Racing Products. Now you can tell that this bash plate is definitely narrower than the OEM bash plate that I had on the Scrambler. But the important piece to me anyways is that it has 4 holes machined to support the bash plate. Now these 4 holes will line up with the support brackets for the SW Motech Crash bars, and I think overall that's going to make the installation much more secure. In addition to that, if I have this bash plate mounted over the SW Motech Crash bars, I think the narrowness will allow the offset of the crash bars themselves to sort of creep out from the left and right hand side of the bash plate without actually hitting the plate. Now, I know it sounds a little weird off camera, but well, what I'll do is I'll show you on video when I go to do the installation exactly what that looks like.
Tiny Triumph Shop.
Tiny Triumph Shop.
Now, our first step of this process is we're going to need to loosen up these SW Motech Crash bars so that we can get the bash plate where it needs to actually be.
Zoop, 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 zoop.
Now, this is the kit that came with the SW Motech Crash bars, and what I think I'm going to do is actually use the R&G kit. I think the bolts might be a bit longer, but for sure the spacers themselves are black, and I think that fits the aesthetic of the bike a bit better. Now this support bracket right here, this actually is going to come on your stock Bonneville Thruxton Scrambler, and it's threaded up or connected to, and I don't know if you can see these brackets here on the frame tubes, but by default you're going to have one of these. We've moved to the underside of the bike, and our next step is to pull these bolts that connect the tube frames to the rest of the frame here, the frame cradle. We've got 2 bolts here, and the lower one is the one we're interested in. Ding! Which takes us to our next step, and that is to replace that bolt with kit provided by R&G. Now we've got the same, obviously, thread and pitch, but you can see it's a much longer bolt. And what we're going to do is we're going to thread this all the way through, get it as tight as we possibly can. And now we're going to use the hardware that's provided by R&G. We have this spacer right here with a chamfered edge. This is going to go on that bolt first, which will allow it to basically sit over or around the nut that is welded onto the frame. We'll follow that up with a washer, and then we're going to finish the installation with a lock nut. Alright, our next step, and probably honestly the easiest one, is that R&G has provided a couple of these foam spacers, and we just need to apply that to the long edge of the skid plate right here. And what that's going to do is prevent the bash plate from damaging the frame or maybe scuffing it up if it moves around or while you're riding with it on. Now, me personally, I don't really think that that's a big deal. I mean, it's a bash plate, it's on the underside of your bike, who really cares? But, you know, hey, maybe it has some advantages like rust protection or something like that. I'm not really entirely sure. Ding! Ding! We've got our spacers in place. Now we need to actually hook the bash plate onto the spacers that we put in on the frame. And that's our next step. Alright, I'm in pretty tight on the assembly, the bolts that we've added here. I want to show you what you're trying to achieve here. Now you can see this spacer, the black spacer that's close to the frame on this side, followed by the silver washer that's on the other side. Now your objective is to leave enough room for the bash plate to actually go in between those 2 items. It's got basically a hook machined out of the back of the bash plate, and that hook needs to hook onto the bolt there. So you want to leave that gap on both sides of the frame after you've installed these bolts. Well, that seemed to do the trick. R&G's instructions say that you'll hook this onto these back bolts, and then the actual bash plate itself will be sort of like slanted down, and then you'll need to thread the bolts through to connect it to the front. Now, we've got the SW Motech Crash bars installed, so that's not what's happened with this particular installation. In fact, what I've done is, you probably saw I pushed the plate in between the crash bars and the tube on the front of the bike, and then actually slid the whole installation forward to get it to hook onto those bolts in the back. I think that is a bit easier for my particular setup, which really only leaves one thing, and that is to secure the bash plate on the front. Now, I fully anticipate this being a proper pain in the ass because I have a lot of moving parts. I've got the crash bars here, I've got the skid plate behind that, or the bash plate behind that. I have to install this again, and then put spacers in. I think the difference, however, between this and the OEM bash plate is that this R&G bash plate has 4 holes machined through the bash plate, which will line up with these 4 holes on the SW Motech Crash bar and the 4 holes on this. So I think that's going to make installation a bit easier. Now, the hardware provided by R&G includes these big spacers here and 4 new bolts here. So I'm just going to play with this and see if I can't get it all to work. Fast forward mode. So I'm trying to get the plate into position, and I just can't seem to get the holes to line up. And you can see the holes for the crash bars are here, and the holes for the bash plate's probably about ½ an inch down. And try as I might, I just can't push it up enough to get into position. Now, I think that the reasoning behind this is that the plate's probably actually supposed to be about where the crash bar offsets are, or the crash bar mounts are, physically. So, you know, I think the plate's actually supposed to be out further, and instead I'm trying to install it behind these crash bar mounts. So, I have a bit of an idea. I think I'm going to try to do is just modify the bash plate so that it'll fit in between these 2 crash bars. And you can see that the bash plate's narrower up here at the top anyways. I just need to replicate that down a bit further, maybe 2 inches with a cutoff wheel, and then this whole installation will actually fit in between the space here. Before we get started on cutting, I need to actually mark the metal where I'm going to cut it. And I think I've got this lined up pretty well, so I just want to cut to about this line. You probably can barely see that on the camera, but that's fairly straight. And again, this is aluminum, so if it's not perfect, I can always smooth this out with just a bit of sandpaper and a bit of elbow grease. It'll work wonders for getting this to be symmetrical on both sides. Now I'm going to mark this in a couple of more places before we get started, and I'm just pushing my right angle flush with this, what appears to be a straight line, or at least the line that I want to follow down, and I'm going to mark that, and then we'll do the same on the opposite side. I'm not too entirely worried about this being perfect. Alright, we've got our bash plate up in the vise, and I'm going to opt for the Dremel rather than the cutoff wheel, just because I think it's a bit more precise. On the downside, I only have a partially used cutoff wheel for the Dremel, so I may not be able to finish the job with it, and I might have to switch. Alright, we've got most of our first curve finished over here on this side of the bash plate, and I'm just going to punch the metal out. Now, this is rough, but I can smooth this and finish it off with sandpaper, which is what I plan on doing later. So now on to the other side. Well, it looks like we're all out of this cutout disc, which is just as well because I think this is notched enough for me to be able to knock it off and then smooth it out with sandpaper. So let's take care of that. So, probably hard to tell on the camera, but the curvature is pretty damn spot on, which is exactly what we were looking for. The next step, of course, is to smooth it out, so I'm going to hunt out some sandpaper and get started on that. Alright, I found some 60 grit sandpaper, and you can see I've just put it in a bit of a column, like a roll right here. And what I'm going to do is just slowly take off the nasty bits of metal left by the Dremel, and then shape this and get it smoothed out to my liking. Now I've got a burr right here where the cutoff wheel went too far in, and the sandpaper will take forever to get that off. So I've got another Dremel here with one of my favorite all-time tools, and that's this little grindy bit that you can see right here. It's just really hardened steel with some teeth to it, and this does such a great job of smoothing out aluminum that you've cut like this. I've used this many times. I really like this tool a lot. Now another tool that will come in handy again with the Dremel for this are just the little drum sanders that you can attach. They look a bit like this, and you can get different grits, 60, 120, 240, etc. And this is just the perfect shape to get in here and really smooth this metal out quickly. So I'm going to put this sander tip on and finish up this work. Alright, I think I'm pretty happy with the way it looks right now, so I'm going to take this outside and test the fit. So I've tried to put the plate on the front after narrowing down the sides, and I made one crucial mistake, and that is the width, and this is the original width up here at the top of the plate, does not fit in between the crash bar mounts. I really thought that it did, and I guess I just wasn't paying close enough attention. As it turns out, this is approximately 3 inches wide here, and of course I've cut this back to match the original width up at the top. But the space between the mounting points for the crash bars is actually 2.5 inches wide at the narrowest point. So that means I need to reduce the overall width of this to get this to fit. Now I've marked the sides of the bash plate where the crash bar mounts actually come in, and I've also marked the top of the bash plate, which you probably can't see on camera here, knocking off 1/4 of an inch on both sides of the plate. So what I want to try to do is just cut off 1/4 of an inch on both sides where the bash plate actually sits in between the mounts for the crash bars. Now, if this fits, fantastic. I think what I'll do is I'll actually pull it off. I've got a wheel grinder over here off camera. I'll probably use that to really smooth this out and get the edges perfectly straight. But I don't want to invest that time if it doesn't actually fit. So we're going to go test that right now. Alright, we're back to the bike, and as you can see, what we've managed to do is get the plate to sit perfectly between these two crash bar mounts. In fact, it actually snaps into position as you push it up, and the channels that I just cut out actually line up with these mounting points. It's certainly not perfectly lined up, but what it is much closer than it has been where it needs to be. So I mean, those are perfectly lined up now, like the whole thing. Leave that onto this, and it's so I don't know. I think I'm about to take this thing into the shop and make the holes bigger. I'm back in the shop, and I'm trying to make the holes for the bottom bolts a bit bigger. Actually, what I really want to do is turn them into a channel instead of just a punch out or a circle. Now, the preferred tool, in my opinion, for this kind of work is a step bit. There may be something better out there for this, but I find that a step bit works really well for manipulating metal, either putting in holes or doing what we're doing here and just turning this into more of a channel.
I don't want to make the hole any wider, because if I do, the head of the bolt may actually fall through the metal. There's a solution for that. I could just put on a washer, but as you saw earlier in the video, there's a lot of moving parts with this already, and I would like to avoid adding anything else if at all possible. So we'll just turn these into channels and see what we get. Alright, back to the front of the bike, and if you can tell, I'm sure you can, I'm very annoyed with this project at this point. But, hey, we're learning shit and getting closer to being done, right? I guess. We'll see. We've got a bolt in. It's fairly well lined up. At least initially, it looks like the holes that these holes in the bottom are now more in line with the holes for the mounts for crash bars. So, if I can get this through and get this plate started, just like before, and then get our spacer behind it, just like so, and then we can get this first bolt to thread, and it has. Now, let's see if we can tackle one on the bottom, which was the issue last time. Hello, come on, come on, come on. Look at that. In like Flynn. Now, if this threads, ladies and gentlemen, throw this up on YouTube and hopefully save somebody some angst and answer some questions. Yes, you can use the R&G bash plate with SW Motech Crash bars on a Triumph Thruxton Bonneville Scrambler. You're seeing it happen right here. It's not plug and play. You do have to modify the plate. It was a bit of work, but it looks great. I mean, the R&G bash plate, it's really svelte. It's tiny. You can barely see it, honestly. But the benefit is that it actually runs the full length of the bike, completely covers the oil filter. So if you're looking for making your Scrambler or an off-road ready Bonneville even, this is probably the bash plate for you. Yeah, so thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I did not enjoy doing this. It was a lot more work than I thought it would be, but hey, whatever, proved that it works. So until next time, YouTube. Well, there you go.